There are a few types of legislation that is dealt with during this session. So there's a bill, which is a form of legislation used to propose laws. A bill can originate in either chamber, but in order to become law, it must be passed by both houses and signed by the governor. There's a resolution, which is a formal declaration of the legislature concerning some subject that it either cannot or does not wish to control by law. Resolutions can be joint, concurrent, or simple, and they require no action on the part of the governor. There's a joint resolution that can propose an amendment to the Constitution of New Mexico, and if passed, it is voted on by New Mexico voters. And there's a concurrent resolution used for the purpose of adopting or amending joint rules of the legislature, and then simple resolutions, but they're not really used very often. Then there's a memorial, which is an expression of a legislative desire that is usually addressed to another governmental body in the form of a petition or declaration of intent. Joint memorials are passed by both houses, and simple memorials are an expression of only one house. And then, so what happens each day? So each day there are committee meetings. There are dozens of committees. Each chamber, there will be House committees and Senate committees, and they will meet to discuss the merits of and propose changes to legislation. In order to become law, legislation must receive a due pass from each assigned committee. Generally speaking, each bill or memorial or resolution will be assigned about 2 committees per the House or the Senate. And then every day there are floor sessions, and these are the main activities of the floor. Floor sessions are held by each house in their respective chamber, and lawmakers discuss legislation and other pertinent matters of the day. Again, a piece of legislation must pass through each committee assignment and a floor vote from its chamber of origin before it can proceed to the other chamber to follow the same process and then become a law. If either chamber makes amendments to legislation, both chambers have to approve of those amendments through concurrence. And then if all goes well, the last stop is the governor's desk. The governor can sign bills, veto them, or do nothing at all. But if the governor signs a bill, it will become law, sometimes as soon as in 90 days, sorry. So this is the really fun and involved part, which is tracking legislation. So our primary tool here is going to be the New Mexico Legislature website. You can find it at www.nmlegis.gov. From here, you can create a My Roundhouse account, create a locator, which I will demonstrate how to do in just a few here. You can find contact info for lawmakers and their committee assignments. You can see committee schedules and floor calendars, and you can find instructions and links to provide public comment. It is pretty much at the discretion of each committee as to what rules they want to follow for you to provide public comment. This year, since we are still in the throes of a pandemic, the session is going to be a hybrid session. So that means people will have the opportunity to participate virtually or in person. I do believe the caveat for that, though, is that all committee meetings will be held virtually, and floor sessions will be the only ones that people can attend in person. So again, you can see the committee schedules and floor calendars. You can find the instructions to provide public comment. There's no public comment for a floor session, but that's where we like to have a lot of fun following along with the legislation that day on Twitter. So shameless plug here, follow us at Native Voters on Twitter, and you can keep up with us during the floor sessions. They can be pretty fun sometimes. You can also, if you don't intend to provide public comment virtually, you can also use this site to view live and archived webcasts. We follow quite a bit of legislation during the 60-day, and I imagine the same will be true for a 30-day So it's impossible to be in all places at all times. So this is a really awesome tool to catch up on stuff and to take notes if you weren't able, if there were, say, two committee meetings at the same time that were relevant. I will kind of walk us through how to use the site to its full capabilities here, because it is pretty handy. So you'll go to, from the homepage, you'll go down to legislation. Right here is my roundhouse, and you can create a account. I already have one and I'm signed in already. And from here, you can create your locator. So for this one, I'm just gonna put movement building Monday, and that will be it for that one. And then down here, it'll say add legislation to the locator, and we can add anything that sounds pretty relevant. This is like a pretty full list of legislation here. There are ways to narrow it down and search for more specific legislation, but I'm just going to pick a few that I already know are relevant to tonight's discussion. Not all, so this is also just pre-filed legislation. Not all legislation gets pre-filed. There are a few big bills that have not been pre-filed, but that will be a big part of the session. So right here you can see I picked a few pieces of legislation that I can kind of touch on in just a bit. So we have the Clean Future Act, Tribal Gross Receipts Rates, Natural Heritage Conservation Act amendments, Native American language certificate salaries, tribal agreements with early childhood department. So up here, it'll tell you the last time their status was updated, any actions that have taken place, and where they are currently located. So right now they have not been assigned any committee assignments. They're just in-house pre-filed status. And then over here, it'll show you the sponsor of the bill. So these are all the legislators that have introduced the bill and will be their primary champions going forward. So, and then if you click on that bill number there, and then yeah, this is the bill number. It'll be really important for keeping track of legislation throughout the session. You can see the full bill text here, and then it'll give you some more options down here to see all the actions that go on. So if there's a vote in the floor, the Senate floor, it'll give you a full vote count of who voted yes or no on the bill, and then it'll tell you where it goes next. And then down here, if there were any amendments made during those floor sessions, they'll show them right here. And every time it goes through committee, you'll find a committee report with a vote count here as well. So those are also very important things to keep track of. Over here we have, so you can find your legislators here. This is pretty helpful. So, you can find who your House of Representatives member is. You can just enter it by the search your address, and that'll give you an exact one. Or if you want to know, maybe you know a few of the Native Caucus members, you can go and it'll just show you like an alphabet list there. But okay, and then if you go over just a step here, you'll have all of your committee assignments. So this is for the session committees, and for the House of Representatives, the Senate, these are interim committees. They're important, but not for this particular topic. So it is really important to know who sits on what committee. A lot of the times we'll be doing lobbying and grassroots lobbying. So it's really important to know who you're talking to. So I definitely recommend getting acquainted with a lot of these members. And because good chances are that we'll have to be in contact with them to try and gain their support for a particular piece of legislation. And then down here, you can see to the what's happening tab here, it'll have all of our floor calendars here for the House, floor calendars for the Senate, and then you'll have your committee schedules down here as well. Let's just look at this Senate committee one here for a moment. It'll tell you your finance committee, there's your chairman. Down here, sometimes if you go to the very bottom, they'll like have a Zoom link. It doesn't look like they have it on here, but sometimes they'll have a Zoom link down here or as instructions if you would like to provide public comment. Maybe you don't want to speak in front of the committee, but you want to just send an email, it'll provide instructions at that bottom part as well. And up here again, they mentioned that you can view the webcast just from the website. And it'll kind of go over like some of the schedule for the day. And again, that's really important. So, you know, if your committee is going to be hearing your particular piece of legislation first, second, or third, it'll tell you right here, and you can kind of plan out your day like that. Last is the webcast. There's nothing today, but if you go use this calendar tool here, and you can go tomorrow, and then stuff will start appearing here tomorrow as everything gets underway. This is not going to be good for if you want to provide public comment. If you just want to follow along and just keep up with what's happening, this is the place to go. If you want to do public comment, go back to the committee schedules, and they'll have detailed instructions at the bottom of each committee schedule so that you have the most up-to-date links and instructions on how to join. And I think that's all I have for NM Legis. So again, last year was the first time I'd really done like this type of in-depth tracking for legislation. I created my own tool to kind of help us stay on track with that. I modeled this after I had no idea how to do this when I first started. So I just did like a ton of research, and I found something that was pretty helpful from the Sierra Club about like that they had created for a legislative tracker. But I modified it and I made it my own, and I just have columns for the bill title, the number, our designated priority, current location, status, more detailed status, hearing dates, hearing times, what is our stance on a particular bill, who are the sponsors. There's a difference between your lead sponsors and any additional sponsors, and then there's spots for vote count notes. And then down here, I also have like a little priority explanation. I have info as to where anyone needs to send information to committees. So it's got each committee head's contact information down here, and then it's got all of the committee members here for both the House committees and the Senate committees. So this was a pretty handy tool, and it's really good for like archival purposes. So as we move into this session and we say, well, like what worked well for us last time, it'll be like good stuff in the notes that'll kind of help us as we especially like these vote counts. Like you want to know like who was a really good champion for this particular piece of legislation this time, and who can we count on again? Maybe who do we have to push a little bit harder, and so on and so forth. So lots of good stuff there. So I'm going to go back to the presentation here. And so we have a list of legislative priorities here. These are just some examples of things that are important to us for the 30-day session. However, it is not guaranteed that lawmakers will take up legislation in each of these areas, or that they will touch on any of the specific bills that I have actually listed here. So we have voting rights legislation. So there's going to be a huge voting rights bill that comes up, and I don't have a specific bill number or sponsor yet, but we will definitely be sharing information on that because it will be very, very important, and hopefully it will do some really great things for tribal communities. Last year, we had a particularly important piece of voting legislation that was intended to make it easier for tribes to conduct elections during emergencies like the pandemic that we are still in. And they were really helpful changes, and we hope that this will only expand upon those. And then there's also automatic voter registration, ranked choice voting, and felon voter reenfranchisement. So again, voting rights and justice, kind of relevant legislation here. Then there's some related to economic dignity, like creating a cap on small loan interest rates so that they do not exceed a 36% rate. Raising the minimum wage, paid family sick and medical leave. Then there's environmental protection. The Clean Future Act is going to be a really, really big bill also this year. The governor announced back in October at the New Mexico Climate Summit that she intended to codify all of her executive orders relating to climate into a piece of legislation. So I believe this is it. This is the big one. So that'll be an important one to follow. We have Natural Heritage Conservation Act amendments. Hopefully this will help protect places like Chaco. And then we have the Green Amendment. And then when we get over here to Native American education, there is Native American language certificate salaries. So this will help create parity for those who are fluent in their language to receive equal pay to someone who has a bachelor's degree in say and teaches like something like Spanish. So currently there is nothing that creates parity for those two positions, even though they are of equal importance and they are there's an equal set of like knowledge skill there. So this will be really, really important. There's tribal agreements with early childhood department. This will help strengthen tribes' say on early childhood education. And then there's going to be, we anticipate bills that will advance the tribal remedy framework and address the Yazzie Martinez lawsuit. So this again will create parity in education for Native American students and really raise the standard. I'm not sure if everyone is, I imagine a lot of people are familiar with the Yazzie Martinez lawsuit, but perhaps for those that perhaps are not so acquainted with it, the Yazzie Martinez lawsuit found that a class of children in New Mexico are not receiving an education that is culturally or linguistically relevant and does not prepare them for higher education or job readiness once they graduate from high school. So these bills will be really important to kind of help address some of those disparities there. And then we have safety and welfare for Native American families and communities. So we will have the State Indian Child Welfare Act. And again, in case some folks aren't aware, the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court is going to, I think, hear arguments pretty soon on the federal Indian Child Welfare Act. And they've been not doing they've not been doing great stuff lately. They don't have very good takes on rights and justice for brown and poor people. So I think this one will be really important to erect some safeguards in there for our state in the event that the Supreme Court does what it does lately. And then this Missing in New Mexico event is actually a piece of legislation that is been partly developed by the New Mexico Indian Affairs Department, and it will be like a day of amplifying awareness for missing and murdered Indigenous women. So this again is just another step in really amplifying all of that awareness. And the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Task Force has been doing some really awesome stuff. And so they will deserve a lot of credit for this particular piece of legislation. So again, this is like a budget session. Most of the stuff that they'll take up will have to do with the budget. This year we have like an influx of cash from the American Rescue Plan and the oh my gosh, I in my head I call it the BIF because that's what everyone kept saying, but the infrastructure funding bill that was passed by Congress last fall. So we've got a ton of infrastructure money and a ton of rescue plan money that we need to figure out how to spend. So hopefully it goes to a lot of this really important stuff here, but that'll only happen if we push our legislature really hard to do the right thing on some of this stuff. So with that, I think that is it for my part of the presentation here.
Thank you, Chloe. That was all so great. We're really grateful to have you walk us through that. I know we had a question about your tracker. Do you have a template that maybe we can share with folks so they can better, have tools to help them throughout this 30-day session?
Oh yeah, definitely. I can edit it to be a little bit more that people can adapt it to their needs. But yeah, totally, I can share that with everyone.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, we'll make sure to get that out to everybody in a follow-up email. Also, I'm just following up. Twitter would be a great place to see what legislation y'all are tracking.
Yes, I think we will post updates on Instagram and Facebook as well. I will drop our usernames in the chat here. On Instagram, we are Native Voters. And on Instagram, you can just find us at on Facebook, you can just find us at NM Native Vote. And on Twitter, we're Native Voters as well. So we will keep up with everything on a day-to-day basis on all of those platforms. But for the really fun and spicy stuff during floor sessions and committee hearings, Twitter is a good place to follow along with us. We'll keep it good and interesting there. And then if you would like to join our newsletter, you can also email me at media@nmnativevote.org, and I send out a newsletter on a monthly basis. Usually during the session, there will be times where we're like, oh crap, something's gonna happen in the committee tomorrow. We need everybody's help. So if you want to keep up with some of those updates, I will be following up with people via email as well.
Great, thank you so much, Chloe. It looks like we're a little bit ahead of time. So Austin, I don't know if you want to jump into the second part right away, or Chloe and Austin, if y'all want to jump into the second part right away, and maybe we can wrap up a little bit earlier than expected.
Sure. Chloe, would you mind pulling up the slides for us? I don't want to share my screen, but if you could, that would be very helpful. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being on. I really appreciate your time to be on, after 6 p.m. on a Monday evening. I'm super grateful to have such a good crew here. Yeah, so my portion that I'm going to be going over is really the civic engagement portion. Again, my name is Austin Miyake. I'm the political director for NM Native Vote. If you want to go over to the next slide. So civic engagement just really means like working in our society to make it better every day, and to make sure that our communities are more involved, to make sure that our communities are heard, and that we're making differences through political and non-political processes. So here, and this is a great slide that I did not put together, full transparency. So these are the following constructs of civic engagement. So civic action, which would be, going out to vote. Your civic duty, which is like, I feel like I have to vote. That's one that typically hasn't always been, I think super accessible to a lot of people. A lot of the times that comes from like having a deep ingrained necessity to vote from your family, which some of us are lucky enough to have. But for a large part, our communities have been intentionally and societally disconnected from that, even though I think it's part of our history. Civic skills, which is our ability to conduct ourselves in those engaged spaces, and social cohesion, making sure that we're all together to go ahead and try to make those changes, that we're not doing things unilaterally, that we're not trying to say, I want all the roads and all the internet to lead up to my house, because that's not the way that we're doing things. It's for the betterment of us as a collective group. If we decide that Austin deserves all the best things, then maybe we do that. But more than likely, the best way to do things is together, and to build that collective that collective power as a group. If you want to head over to the next slide. Oh, well, here we go. Here we are. So here are some explanations on the last slides. So again, just civic action. This is a lot that we focus on here, or with our organization at NM Native Vote. We really do try to focus on making sure that our people are civically active. That really is like almost the final step of where we want to be. Obviously, we want everyone to engage multiple times throughout the year, but we want that to really, one of the main ways that we harvest that is through people voting. And that is something that is really crucial for us, for our success, not only as an organization, but as people, and as people who share values. Making sure that we're voting and making our voice heard is absolutely crucial. But it doesn't end there. It includes, like, getting people to run for office. That has been something that has been really difficult, and especially with Native women, where we find that they're great leaders, but it's really hard to convince people that, like, no, it's a good time to run. And now is a great time. Yes, you'd be a great leader. Yes, you have the support from the community to do this. That has been really crucial for us, and something that we really want to continue to focus on going forward, and to really prioritize as a part of our organization. Another part of that is advocating for legislation. Chloe gave a great portion of hers to really how you follow along with that. And I personally didn't know that your spreadsheet was that detailed for the tracking last year. Like, we just saw the stuff pop up on our calendar, and we're like, okay, that's where we need to be. So seeing what went into that is like really incredible. But not everyone has to be that engaged, and not everyone has the kind of time to be that engaged. But if there are a few things that you really are focused on, like, I really want to see this, the Native teachers be paid at the same rate. It doesn't make sense that they're not paid like other language educators. Then you can totally just follow along, and like that one extra community voice can always be the tipping point. That one extra community voice lends us that much extra power, considering that, like, for a really, really popular bill, maybe 100 people would ever talk on that. And more than likely, like, most of these committees have like 20 comments per bill. So one person adding an additional comment continues to tip the scale in our favor, to say that the community really does favor that. And then obviously volunteering with community organizations, which is super helpful for us, and I'm sure for everyone else here today, to really have that extra help to do the things, to make the signs, to go out and register voters, to go out and tell people that there's an election happening, all that kind of stuff. we really, really rely heavily on our volunteers for, and the work is just not possible without the number of good volunteers that we have. Next slide. So this year, we actually have a good couple of elections. So this year is a midterm. Obviously, 2 years ago was the presidential election. This year is a reduced number of people who are going to be on the ballot, but it is no less important at all. In fact, like this is really where we see a lot of those, like either we can slide back a good ways or we can move forward. And this election will really help decide what, the next few years are going to look like if we're actually making progress or not. We have an election for municipals in March. We had a bill that went through a couple of years ago to try to standardize things to make sure that the municipals were not on their own schedule, but a couple of smaller counties really wanted to keep their stuff separate. So I think Grants and like Roswell will have an election in March. For the large majority, I think that most of our elections will have wrapped up in November of last year, and we can kind of focus on the next election, which is the primary election on June 7th. Again, super, super important. We see reduced turnout here, partially because of New Mexico. You have to be registered to a party in order to vote in the primaries. So you have to be registered pretty much like one of the big three, and generally it's like big two. So usually it's like Democrat and Republican, and you won't really have an independent primary. If you had multiple independent candidates, you might, but that hasn't typically been the case. So typically you'd have, let's say you have 3 Democrats on the ticket and 2 Republicans. This is where you'd narrow down the field to say, this is our number one choice for our Democrat, and this is our number one choice for our Republican. And then you send those to the general election, which is on November 8th, the first Tuesday after the first Tuesday in November. Usually it's the very first Tuesday, but since the first Tuesday is the first, they push it back an additional week. So that will be when everyone is up on the ballot. You decide, well, are we electing a Democrat or a Republican? Are we electing a Democrat, or Republican, Independent, Green, whatever? Whoever won the primaries, that's when they face off to see who actually ends up representing the district the following year. And usually they get placed into office in either December or January. Next slide. So we made a lot of really great gains in 2018. So we had our highest turnout ever with like in a midterm with 700,000 voters, which is like unheard of for New Mexico. We had 55% of our population vote. It's like 55.6, but it was like a really great election. Lots of enthusiasm for people headed to the polls. For the first time ever, like I was hopping on the phone and calling people, and they were like, hey, I already voted, or I'm already headed to the polls, or yeah, you don't need to tell me because I did the research myself. It was just one of those like whirlwind years that we don't often have, where people were really excited to go vote, and it was great. And here in New Mexico, we elected our first Pueblo woman to Congress, which was amazing, and led ultimately to Deb Haaland being selected for the Department of the Interior, Secretary of the Department of the Interior, which is like the first ever, which is incredible, and totally not possible without the engagement that we had in 2018, and just really, really crucial for us here in New Mexico to really be able to have a strong advocate in the Biden administration. Next slide. So again, we had some other stuff, especially in state here, that happened directly as a result of the 2018 election, where again, lots of people, a record number of people went out to go vote. We saw a lot of really huge policy changes like that we just hadn't seen before. In 2014, we had a really, really bad year where people were just not engaged, and people were from 2014 and 2016, we saw some slight changes, but still things were like kind of waiting. If you want to go to the next slide, I think it's actually in there. Yeah. So in 2014, we had really, really low numbers, which really messed with our whole state government. And in 2015, a lot of crazy legislation that we'd never seen before passed here in New Mexico, where oil and gas got huge leases to do new drilling. They renegotiated for lower payouts for New Mexico. So like the amount that we got per so many thousand gallons was lower. So like they had to do more mining to make up the same amount of money. They renegotiated like those agreements. They gave huge tax breaks, which we're still paying for today, which really only went to the top 1%. And in order to pay for that, raised gross receipts tax, which is what you pay at the grocery store. That's like your 7 cents. They raised that in order to pay for the 1%. So to pay for the 1% tax, they had to essentially tax everyone else in the state. On top of that, they initiated photo voter ID laws to continue to suppress the vote and hopefully keep turnout low. Luckily, that wasn't the case in 2016. But there's a huge argument to be made that like, you know, that does disqualify votes, especially like when we really limit it to say, yes, photo voter ID is a different thing from voter ID. Here in New Mexico, we've had voter ID forever, which means that you can bring a piece of mail or your tribal ID or you know, your driver's license, any of that other kind of stuff to go vote. Whereas photo voter ID is much more stringent and much harder to attain, especially for poor people who like don't want to spend, you know, $200 on an additional ID. So making sure that like we're very clear about that is going to be really important, especially going into this session where we're trying to push back on some of those things. But if you want to go forward. So what can be done? One of those things that I totally forgot to add to this is that sort of lobbying that's going to happen. Here in New Mexico, we've been really blessed to be like one of the few states that's not trying to limit voter registration and voter engagement. We're actually trying to advance and to push back on some of those and to get new voting rights for people who have traditionally been disenfranchised. And one of the big ways is going to be with some of those, there are two votership bills, which are heavily going to affect Native American people at multiple levels of those pieces of legislation. There are pieces which are, you know, directly related to Native voters and specifically like tribal voters, and then some which are not specific, but do have an outsized effect on Native American people. So some of the other stuff that can be done is to talk to your friends and family to make sure that they're voting. This is huge. My little brother is somebody who like just totally wouldn't vote unless I badgered him over and over up until election day, and then like put him in my car and drove him to the polls. He doesn't really want to do it. He doesn't want to spend the time. He'd rather be skateboarding around. And I totally get it. It can be boring, but the more that you can push your family members, the more turnout that we have. And if everybody's pushing their family to go vote, that turns into a lot of people very, very quickly. And really, you don't see that impact directly usually. But here in New Mexico, we regularly have races that are decided by like 10 votes. One of the very first races I ever worked on was decided by 14 back in 2016. I had a race which I door knocked for like an additional like 4 hours for, and got a couple of people registered to vote, and our candidate won by 14 votes. And you know, you never know if like that little extra is just enough to get you over the top, right? Some of the other stuff that you can do that is really important is to research your candidates. It can be really hard to find information on some people, but make sure that you know who you're voting for going into the polls. I know when I go in, I'm always like, oh, I forgot the water conservation was on this election. Oh, I forgot the school board on this election. So make sure you like look up your ballot and check who all is going to be on there. It's almost a guarantee that there's going to be somewhere on there who you just don't know. And you can always, you know, sitting there at your polling station, look up the person on your phone if you can, or call somebody who you think might know. But make sure you know who's on your ballot it can really change like who your vote is going to be for. And sometimes they're not always out front with what they really believe in. Sometimes if they know they have an unpopular thing, opinion, that they're not going to uphold that. So you have to kind of dig a little bit to make sure, well, is this person really going to work for me? And that helps us out a ton. That helps Native people out a ton. And it really just helps to really expand our impact, especially as we go to the state legislature, to ask for positive changes. The other thing that you can do, which I think is considerably easier, is just follow groups who you trust to do voter outreach or trust their values. If that's NM Native Vote or Native Women Lead or the Working Families Party or the League of Women Voters or Voices for Children, you know, making sure that you're following them can really help to find just like some really easy information on some of the candidates that you are trying to find information about. And sometimes it's not always clear, but you know, if you trust in a group's, you know, issues and values and that you regularly align with them, following them is a great way to find some really quick information on, oh, this person is good for Native issues, right? This person is good for working families issues. That kind of stuff, it can be a little bit difficult to track, as we've seen with the state legislature part. Like, you know, it's hard to follow all of those things. Sometimes, like, one of the most annoying things that I ever did was my first time working the state legislature. I didn't include votes which were for a no rec, which is something which is not reported. And we all forgot to write down who voted for what, and we couldn't remember who our friends were in the room next time we walked in. So making sure that you're following along with a group who is actually taking care of that can be really crucial. For us, we called another group that we were working with at the time and said, like, hey, do you have a vote count? Luckily they did. So obviously we can understand how like it can be easy to lose track of like this specific issue. So the more that you follow along with groups that you really do connect with and that you share values with, the better chance you have of really making sure that you're covered in your understanding of some of these people. And then lastly, for our overachievers, we're always asking for help. You know, whether that be like, you know, do you have a family member who's looking for a job and is in school right now, and wants to do some phone banking to get people involved? Like, we're always looking for phone bankers. Or for other groups, like where they're always looking for voter registrars or people to go talk to voters. Everyone is always looking for volunteers. And I'm sure if you have some extra time to devote, they will not forget that you came in and volunteered and lended your voice to them for however like whatever amount of time you have. So making sure that like if you can, it is so valuable for you to volunteer, and just absolutely appreciated by anyone you're volunteering for. So just if you have any extra time, you know, follow us along, and you know, we're always looking for extra people to help out. Next slide. Is that the last one? Yes, it is. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody. And I think that we're a good bit early.
Yeah, that went by fast. So I think at this time we want to open up the floor to anybody who has any questions, you know, about, you know, maybe who your specific legislator is, or just any of the bills that or any of the pieces of legislation that NM Native Vote went over. Just any questions you might have.
I had a question. I was wondering, you guys were saying how you are looking for maybe some volunteers to help out with some of your initiatives. How can we get involved with your organization?
Sounds like a great question for you, Chloe.
Let's see. We have a number of ways here. So currently, well, we're going to be heading into, so we're doing our legislative session right now. We're going to be getting ready to go into elections faster than you know it. And then we always need volunteers for there. We also just want to build just a really dedicated group of members too, who are activated and ready to engage with us on a variety of topics. Again, if you are interested in keeping up with what we do as an organization, because we do quite a bit. So we work here at NAVA Vote, where we do a lot more of the election work, but we are also part of another organization called NAVA Education Project. And on that side, we do a lot of environmental work. Again, we touch on issues of economic dignity, education, and civic engagement still, but in a less partisan fashion. But we do a lot of really cool stuff throughout the year, and we always look for people who are informed or interested in helping us advance these issues that are really critical for Native peoples. So if you would like to get involved with us, I just always welcome people to email me. And again, my email is media@nmnativevote.org. If anyone got on late, I will just drop it in the chat again. And from there, I can get you signed on to our email list, and we'll keep you really up to date with the stuff that we have going on for the month. We also do use all of the socials. So NAVA Vote, I think we have a LinkedIn under our NAVA Education Project account. But yeah, you can find us on LinkedIn over there too. We will be getting ready to start expanding our work in the Albuquerque area too. So that'll be really exciting. We've just hired an organizer for the area, and she'll need lots of help just getting things rolling here with our Albuquerque programs and social media. I'm on our socials every day, just promoting a variety of topics. But if you want to get involved, you can always reach us through there. That's probably one of the easiest ways. And again, we just try to do a lot of really cool stuff that is critical for promoting the advancement of our communities and our educational opportunities for our people, and protecting our air, land, and water. So, sorry, I hope I didn't ramble too much.
I'll just jump in really quick too. And like anytime, you can follow us along on, whatever one you prefer. So like I like Twitter. I think I have most fun there, but whatever you like, if you like checking your email and finding the information, or Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Chloe is really good about updating all of those. So just follow along, and we post like stuff frequently. I think we probably posted like 3 job openings over the past like month and a half probably. So there's always something happening. There's always a place where we're looking for help. There's always something going on where we can use some additional voices, and really like would be valued, especially in like December. I mean, we had this crazy stuff happening with redistricting where we needed people to be out to really help and voice their needs as a community. So that kind of stuff is super valuable, and it's always happening. So whatever method you follow along in, I'm sure you'll end up with the proper information to get engaged.
Yes. I don't know. We won't, we try to do a lot of stuff with paid opportunities too. So again, just keep an eye out for us during election season, because there is plenty of opportunity to earn a little bit of income there too, while doing some really cool stuff that benefits our communities. And so keep an eye out for us during election season in June and later in the fall. And some of those opportunities will be available, but please follow along with us during this session. It's a really short session, but there's like so many important and critical pieces of legislation that'll be moving through it. And again, you can follow along with us. Our social media is probably the most up-to-date place you can find information, but we will definitely need help throughout this process. Again, reaching out to committee members. You can find, we'll post all the information about how to get involved in that process via our social media, but yeah, just keep an eye out because we need as much community as we can get through this process. And everyone has just been so great and critical through helping get some really important pieces of legislation across the finish line, just from a few emails to committee members or showing up for public testimony. And our good friend and coworker, Joseph, who's on the line with us, can certainly attest to that too.
So thank you so much for joining us, Chloe and Austin. I'm Alicia. Sorry, I was on earlier, but in driving mode, but was just gonna close us out and just really say thank you so much on behalf of Native Women Lead. We really, really appreciate you both and all of the incredible work that NAVA does. We are just so grateful to have you join us tonight. And I can't think of a better way to honor Dr. King and his work in this way. And so just thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to every single one of you who joined us tonight and took time. This was incredible.
Thanks, everyone.
Everybody.